CPS workers. What was the worst case you've seen? I'm not a CPS worker, but I work criminal investigations for the Army for a number of years and work very closely with CPS on our child cruelty or neglect cases. One particular case sticks with me 5 years later. We received a call around 1700, which is usually a good indicator that we're going to be responding to a legit call. The bad ones always seem to come in right before we head home for the evening. The call came in from CPS. They had received a call from a soldier's unit. The soldier, her husband, was in the field for training exercises and got a very vague emergency call from his wife that she was having some medical problems. Husband asked his unit to send somebody to go check on his wife to make sure she was okay. Too easy. Unit sends a guy over who finds the wife in the kitchen, covered in red from the waist down. He also notices a red trail from the back room into the kitchen or foyer area. There's a red-stained spatula on the counter. What's more is that there's animal droppings and trash covering the entirety of the house, save for walking paths. There are 2 small children crying from somewhere in the back of the house. This dude immediately makes 2 calls, one back to his command and one to CPS. Command notifies husband, who's immediately sent home. Command also calls us. We received this call after the one from CPS. CPS reports the same story. They also informed us that the CPS worker who responded to the house had to call for help because they got sick from the smell of the house before they even got inside. We respond. We observe exactly what was initially reported. The sight is unimaginable if you've never seen something like it. The smell was insane. We wore Tyvek suits to move around the house. When we finally get the wife cleaned up, she tells us that while using the bathroom, she had a very early term miscarriage. She states that she had no idea what to do. Her intent was to keep them until her husband came home and then decide what to do. Craziness of this aside, CPS and law enforcement have now seen the conditions of this house. After hospital visits and making sure everyone is physically and mentally healthy, we hear back to the house with CPS to see what we're actually looking at. 2-story townhouse. The entire house was covered in trash, food, dishes, clothing, etc., and animal droppings. The dining table was covered with dirty dishes and old food. The food in the fridge was far out. There was no sitting room on the couch in the living room. The master bedroom had a queen bed, no sheets. The mattress had a dark brown stain covering over half the mattress. It was not positive for blood. Never figured out what the hell it was. The kids only had mattresses on the floor. No other furniture in the rooms. Clothing, trash, and waste all over the floor. The bathrooms. I've seen truck stop restrooms that were cleaner. The list of disgusting things in this house goes on. CPS gave them 3 weeks to fix this atrocity or the kids would be removed. In that time, both husband and wife get into more legal trouble. Not to detract from the story, but their charges included substances and rough trade. CPS finally was able to get the kids out of that home. Never learned if the parents regained custody, but I pray they didn't. It was the absolute worst imaginable house I've ever seen. The smell stuck to your clothes. Housing said the only way the house would be safe to live in again would be if it were completely torn down. Not to mention the insanely crazy parents. I am so curious as to how it got to that point. They probably aren't mentally stable at all. Story 2. The one that hit me the hardest was before I actually started going out on my own and was shadowing the after-hours team. We got a call from a different state worker about a family who had moved to our state and we needed to follow up. The family had 6 kids, and one of the girls in the family was a registered offender. It was heartbreaking. It was a blended family, and the mom, who was the bio parent of the girl, believed that the girl had been exposed to bad things by her bio dad. Anyway, one night one of them said, "Girl's name touched me." The parents, shocked, talked to each kid individually where they all disclosed that she had touched them. Not knowing how to handle it, they called CPS in their state for help. CPS came out, called the cops, and for reasons that weren't clear to me, the child was placed in the registry by a judge. In my experience, usually they try inpatient and other therapies before going that route, but apparently that state and judge did things differently. So when the family moved to our state, we had to go out to make sure the family was following adequate guidelines. For example, the girl was not allowed to be alone with her siblings. She couldn't swim in the pool at the same time as her siblings. She couldn't go to school or the park or birthday parties because she was an offender. Her siblings couldn't have friends over. She was such a sweet kid. It really was such a sad situation. She told us she wanted to be a fashion designer and her favorite thing to do was play Xbox with her siblings. All the kids were in therapy and they appeared to harbor no ill will toward her. I think about this case a lot, and I always wonder what happened to their family. Story 3. Without getting into too much detail, I was incredibly disappointed in how the military handled the situation I and other neighbors reported multiple times. I'm not military, but was a live-in nanny on a base for a family. There was a woman down the street from us who I befriended. She had 2 kids. One wasn't his. I always got a weird vibe from her husband. He would come to the bus stop and not talk to her son. He would completely ignore him and see the other 2 kids and say hi. This poor kid looked miserable all the time. A couple months later, she told me he roughs her son up all the time. He won't let her buy him new clothes, shoes, and he can't sit with him at the table. He's about 11 at this point, so that was reported. MPs come, CPS comes, she tells them it's not all true, they investigate and don't do anything to make a report. She then tells me a few days later that he has been forcing her to try to get her pregnant again, and she doesn't want another kid, etc. I convince her to report him, but she doesn't. I ask the family I work for advice and numbers to call within the military that will help her out, give them to her, and she hides them. Next day I saw the boy outside at the bus stop, busted lip. I asked him what happened and he says he fell. I asked him if he was sure that's what happened, and he started to cry and I said, "Don't worry, come hang out at our house." I told her he can come over and her other kids can come too to play, so they spent a few hours at my house with the kids I nanny. I made a report to CPS that night and they came the next day. He told the MPs what had happened and CPS made him sign a paper saying he will never put his hands on that kid again. Obviously it didn't work. It just won't let that kid do anything now. So now he has taken control of all her money. He met her while he was overseas in Africa and married her and brought her to the States. So when her visa was expiring, he got the mail and shredded all the letters about it so she couldn't find them and he could save the day and berate her about it. Then he would take the keys so she wouldn't have a car all day and couldn't leave. One day I looked out the window and the MPs were taking him out in handcuffs and she's hysterically crying, but telling him he deserves it. Still not sure what happened, but they moved him into the barracks for a bit and she filed for a divorce. Apparently, he refused the divorce and the military court took his side and said he would be allowed back into the house if need be as his money and job pays for the house. Fast forward about a week and they're taking him out in handcuffs again. They go to court again. She asks for a divorce and they said they will do a legal separation. She can stay in military housing, but he has to live in the barracks and if he needs to come to the house, he needs to contact MPs to take him there. He's allowed to have the kids whenever he wants, including her oldest sons, who when they got married he adopted. He took the other two all the time, but never the oldest. After he was banned from the house without supervision, she found out she was pregnant and now has a third kid from him. I hope she gets those kids help because they were extremely aggressive children all the time. Not the 11-year-old though, which is understandable seeing as what they witnessed often. I wish there was more that could be done. Unfortunately, what it looked like to me was that they were doing anything they could to protect him. Nobody else mattered. But I can also say as much as she called the police on him, she also, I'm sure, gave in a lot to talk to him and whatnot. There were a couple times the police arrived and she wouldn't tell them anything, which is fairly common in that type of situation. The young son spoke up a bunch of times and nothing. Story 4. Not a CPS worker, but my mom was a foster parent and ran a daycare out of the home, so we've known the specifics and assisted in a number of cases. One foster case was a child that was placed with us for about a week. He was a tiny little baby and despite being in high school, I worked up to feed him. The mother was young who was abandoned by her parents for said pregnancy and simply didn't know how to care for a baby. CPS was really understanding and gave her classes and then when she learned how often a baby actually needed to be fed, she got her child back. She reached out to us and thanked us for everything and we got regular updates. Child is 2 now, very happy and loved. Another case where we called CPS. A mother brought her 4 kids to our daycare, her oldest son and 3 daughters. Oldest son was 7 and did most of the care for his younger siblings, ranging from 2 to 5 in age. Mother was pregnant, again, and she was obviously below the poverty line. Baby was born, her kids got progressively more and more dirty to the point my mom reached out in the Facebook group for clothing donations for the kids. They'd get dropped off, she would bathe them all and dress them again. She made excuses for the mother, which she says now is her biggest regret. She just kept saying this is her 5th child, and she's a single mom and a new baby, it's hard. Then we had to care for the baby. Sickly. After 3 days with him, my mom called CPS. We were never told what happened with him, but I remember looking out our front window and seeing them in the workers' car all crying. It's hard, but it's better for them in the end. They were probably crying because they knew they were losing the only person who really cared for them, this person's mom. Oh, and since you're already halfway through the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Story 5. Not CPS, but it worked in partnership with him. In all of these cases, CPS workers were on my side and their leadership was against them. They had far, far too many cases to be safe. I witnessed someone roughing up a kid. It was incredibly violent while I was watching and moving towards them. I dialed 911 and stepped between them. I was later reprimanded for putting myself at risk. If the parent was willing to do that in front of me, what were they doing when no one could see? The state did not move them into foster care because they were too old and the oldest kid could watch out for the younger. I had one threaten self-harm and refuse a safety contract. We called crisis intervention. They did not come out because if she didn't have a safety contract, there wasn't a bed within 8 hours or so that could take her. If they came out, they were responsible for her. I stayed with the client for, I think, about 14 hours. I had a bio father return to the home after prison time for mistreating his daughter. They had the girls follow extensive safety procedures instead of telling the parents she couldn't return. The state did not want to initiate a removal because she was old enough to learn to protect herself. I had a client who was following the pattern of aggressive behavior and kept being returned from the facility where he was being treated, right back to the family where he was being mistreated. It was absurd. As a side topic, if you're struggling with substance dependency and think you're still a good parent, you aren't. That's your dependency fooling you. Get your kids into therapy and let them live elsewhere until you get yourself clean. Story 6. I didn't work in CPS, but I did work closely with CPS. I worked for a nonprofit emergency shelter for children who had been abandoned, neglected, or mistreated. Mind you, I worked at this shelter 10 plus years ago, so the details are a bit fuzzy. I got a call one night, work graveyard, by 2 male sibling groups coming in. They had been found and picked up at Motel Drive. The oldest son is 11 and the other is 9. I started reading their case file and there's a long cruelty or neglect history. After being with us a few days, the 11-year-old is showing increased signs of PTSD, hypervigilance, paranoid, aggressive. He ends up pulling a knife on another one of the kids in the shelter because they came up from behind and grabbed him. Apparently the mom, who was a substance user, was using him to John so she could get money or substances. He would stay awake all night in the motel while she was out of it and hard substances to make sure none of the Johns came back to hurt her or his younger brother. By the time the kid turned another year older, he had been expelled from 3 different schools and was banned from that particular school district. Eventually, Mom lost custody. The last I heard is they were placed in foster care. Imagine being so little and fearing for your life and your mom's and your brother's. That's too much for a child. Story 7. First case I went on during training. Showed up at a house in a trashy town and instantly we were verbally attacked by an obese, belligerent lady. This was Mom and she was being accused of neglecting her children by not caring for their hygienic needs and not having any food. We tell her we need to chat with the kids alone, but she refuses and stands by as we start talking. She keeps interrupting and yelling whenever we ask anything. My trainer calls the cops because she can tell the situation is escalating quickly and we need to talk to the kids. Cops show up, Mom sort of calms down and we get to chat with the kids. Teenage boy's pissed and refused to tell us anything useful. 2 younger sisters, 8 to 11-ish. Didn't say much, but they didn't need to say anything. 2 little girls have knits in their hair. Their hair was matted in basically one big dreadlock. These were white people, so matting the hair like that is hard. When it's clear that the tide is turning against the mom, she yells at the kids to run away and they follow orders. We spend the next hour trying to find the kids and then trying to get them away from the mom who has huddled them into a neighbor's yard in a corner. We got the kids back to a foster care agency office. No family was available to take the kids. This was when my heart broke. The workers sit the girls on a chair over a large plastic sheet and start removing the knits with a knit brush or hairbrush. I watch as they start to cry because of it hurting. The workers were as gentle as possible, but they had to have been enduring that for months, if not longer. This is when I totally broke down and left the room and had to collect myself. Mind you, this is around 11 p.m. It turned out the mom had significant mental health needs she wasn't caring for and had been ignored by family for years, so no one knew what was going on. School officials claimed they didn't notice anything but suspected the kids weren't coming and the school liked it that way. Story 8. It was one of the first cases I investigated, but it involved a child's passing. There was actually another worker assigned to take the priority 1 cases that day, but she was stuck out in the boonies working another emergency when we got the call. A 2-year-old child had been brought to the emergency room by her mother. The child was cold and blue, and she had a living sister aged 3 years old. I had just been cleared to take P1s and my unit supervisor sent me to start working the case. She also called the region to send us a special investigator, a CPS investigator with police or military experience. They have special privileges in their work. By the time we got the report, police were already questioning the mother. It was my first time witnessing a police interrogation. The mother refused to speak English during the interview and she had her friend translate for us. For some reason, there wasn't a Spanish to English translator brought for the interrogation. Anyway, the mom claimed the child had been jumping on the bed with her sister when she fell off the bed and hit her head on the floor. She was sick later in the evening, and when the mom checked in on her the next day, the child passed away. Super sketchy, as preliminary reports showed no head injuries. We went to the house to investigate the scene with the police, and the mom and everything had been stripped bare. All the furniture and family possessions gone. It smelled strongly of bleach. It was the first time I had a close look at the mom, and she had bruises and her eye was swollen. She claimed she slipped. Anyway, in the following days, we learned the truth. A year prior, CPS investigated the family when it came out that mom's boyfriend was being physically cruel to the children. The department required the mom to enter a relationship with a boyfriend, which she did, and provided therapeutic services for the family. But a few months after CPS left, the boyfriend came back to the home. The night of the incident, the kid messed her pants while the boyfriend was watching a sports game. He got angry and hurt her. The mom was correct in that the child had been sick the night before her passing. This child spent her last hours on earth suffering. The mom had waited so long to take the little girl to the hospital because she wanted to give the boyfriend lead time to escape. He ended up going to Mexico, where he was later found, brought back, and charged for his crime. Both he and the mom are now in prison. The little girl's big sister was reunited with their biological father, who had been spending the past few years trying to find the girls. He was inconsolable with the news. It was by far the worst case I've ever worked. These types of cases always are. As an employee with CPS, your job is to protect children, and when you work a case with a child who passed, you feel so useless, so helpless. Prison, honestly, those two should be for what they did. Story 9. I'm a CPS investigator, so I'm the front line of all the allegations. Here's some background just so you understand what my obligations are. Our state splits it up into 2 divisions. DHS and the state police have their own division. The state police get the worst allegations. DHS gets the most run-of-the-mill, like cuts, bruises, welts, and any kind of neglect. Medical, educational, environmental. I work for DHS. And here's the kicker. The state police can't do a removal. So if they feel a child is unsafe, they have to call us and we reassess, then make a removal based on our decision. So the worst case I've worked is a case of neglect in which the 10-year-old female was in the custody of her legal father. It wasn't snow. Even when he met me for scheduled interviews, he was on it. In itself, that's just terrible. But after every meeting, he'd pick up and move so that I couldn't relocate. The final meeting he has with my supervisor, while I attempt to locate the juvenile in order to take custody, he gets the gist of what's going on and has a friend pick the girl up from school and tells us he's having her sent to her aunt's home, but she never shows. Then he drops off too, and he starts texting my work cell saying stuff like, "I'll end everyone before I let you take her." And remember, he's on hard substances. Finally, after 3 full days, I find her hiding under one of his friend's beds. He's arrested for fleeing. Come to find out, this man is out in bond for taking a knife to the man who he thought called in the report. So I take custody of the child and have a hair follicle done. She tested significantly positive for snow, as if she ingested it herself. What the hell? The only good thing is that she went to her aunt's home who had a clean background and was safe. Girl just thought she was on an adventure with her dad. And the worst part is, you get used to all that. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.